be the epitome of the good citizen who's devoted to public service. What kind of family did you come from? And were your parents the role models for you?
That's a very, very easy and wonderful question for you to ask me, because I had a mother and father that were devoted to each other and to myself, and when I had one older sister. My grandfather was sent to the United States by his family to come here from Russia because their daughter had come the year before, and they felt that she was old enough to take care of this young boy. And she was to meet him at Ellis Island, and he was put on a boat in Russia and said goodbye, never to see his mother and father again. When he got into the waiting room, he was just sitting at a bench waiting to hear the words of his name be called out. And the daughter had been looking, his sister had been looking and looking for him, couldn't find him, and finally she heard his name being called. After World War II, and I was home from college, my mother said to me, "You can't just hang around the house," and I knew that. And she said, they can use you in the hospital, particularly on Sundays. And this was when the war was just over, and men were coming to the United States, and hospitals were jammed in the United States, including the Beth Israel. And she said, particularly on Sunday, and you can volunteer there on Sunday, they would love it. So I started volunteering there on Sunday. We had a good training for a good hour as to check that the food was all correct and that we had the right room and so forth. So I took my wagon and off I went into the room, and I'm very nervous, and I call off the first name, and I say, and I look at the name and I say, "Mr. Breakfast?" And nobody answers. And I say it again, "Mr. Breakfast?" And nobody answers. And I look around the room, and there's all this little snickering of all this men, and then there's laughing so loud. And I go, "Oh, that's breakfast." Well, I'm laughing now, but I was almost crying then. Here I'm in a room with about 10 men just out of the war, and stupid me coming out with I go to the first man, and he's laughing so hard, and he said to me, and I said, "Oh, I'm so sorry." He said, "Sorry? Lady, I haven't laughed for 2.5 years. You've saved my life." Yeah.
So you graduated from Brown University, and you have the distinction of having become the first editor of the Brown paper. Yeah. And would you like to talk about that a little?
Yeah, it's very simple. I was editor of the Pembroke paper, which was the girls' college on Brown. Oh, yeah. When the war came, the men were all leaving. They had trouble finding an editor. And I got a phone call one day and said, "We've looked at your paper, we like it. We'll give you some men here on the staff. Would you take over the editorship until we can get ourselves straight again?" And I said yes. But we did it, and we were happy to do it, and Brown was happy to have us do it.
You met your husband. Would you give kind of a timeline of that? Because you met him, and how long after that did he have to go away? And you had a quite tight relationship because you knew when he'd come home, you'd get married.
Well, I not only had a tight relationship, I'll take it in the middle. Okay. A tight relationship, but an engagement while he was over. And that's a wonderful, beautiful family story. I used to go to his house every Friday night for supper because they knew that David and I, actually, they took me to New York with them to say goodbye. And they couldn't have been nicer to me. And I just adored them. And I used to go Friday night there to have supper with them. I graduated, came home, was living at my mother and father's house, which was only about 3 blocks away from David's blocks, not houses, 3 blocks away from where David and his family lived.
Oh, so you met David in high school?
I met him before the war, yes.
But in high school?
Yes,
You were in
yeah,
high
well,
school.
he went to private school, but that's when I met him, when I was in high school.
Okay.
And his mother was ill, so I used to, and David had 2 brothers, 3 sons in the war. Pretty tough, it was awful. And she was not well. So I would drop in 1 or 2 times, but I was working, but 1 or 2 times during the week, and then go Friday night for supper with them, her and her husband. Wonderful couple, beautiful couple. I loved both of them dearly. And we were sitting at the table Friday night, and the doorbell rang, and a man came in. And they said hello to him, and hello, and they introduced me to him, and he turned to me and he said, I'm in the jewelry business. And I thought, well, that's very nice, you know. And he said, and I'm here to measure your finger. And then he said and my father-in-law knows this because my father-in-law is the one that called him. David had written to his father-in-law. He won some kind of a contest on an island, and he sent his dad a couple of $100. And he said, go out and buy Audrey a ring. And so his father called this friend, who was a jeweler, and he comes to the house, and this is how I know I'm getting engaged. He says to me, I'm here to measure your finger, and I'm wondering, what am I going to do? You know, I'm scared. I don't know what this is all about. The doorbell rings, and it's my mother and father coming to the engagement. And he measures my ring and finger, and he says, I was told you want I forget what I told him, a square diamond in a round circle or something like that. It might have been opposite. Whatever it was, that's how I got engaged. Sitting at a dining room table with my future mother and father, the jeweler, and my mother and father. That's how I got engaged. And my father was not happy about it. He adored David, but he was afraid. The war was still going on, heavy, and he was afraid that I'd be engaged. He was being the typical father, thinking of me and nothing else, that if something happened to him, it might ruin my whole life. And I assured him that everything was going to be wonderful, and it was. The sad thing is, the day he arrived in the United States, David, he called me from California. This was about 6 months later from the ring. And he called me from California, and the first call in the United States that he made, how's my mother? And I said, my mom and I just came home from her funeral. He did not know his mother had died, so I had to tell him. So there are always sad things at happy times and so forth. So when he got to Boston, we were all so thrilled. At those days, it's like a movie. At those days, the planes were way out. You know, you had to walk into the thing. And sure enough, a lot of people like me are waiting for men from California. And we went flying out that field, you know, and it was one of the happiest days of my life. And there he was, and we got married. He wanted to get married in 2 weeks. and he had two other brothers in the service, and they all came home, and they said, no, Mother just died, and she died the day he arrived in the U.S. And he said, no. They said, no, you're waiting, and so forth. So
how long did you wait?
Oh, we waited a month. That's all. But it was a small wedding in my mother's house.
Where did you first live after you got married?
We lived in a terrible apartment. Finding places to live was very difficult because of being after the war. The war was over at this point.
And everybody was returning.
Returning, yes, everybody was returning. And there had been no building for at least 3 or 4 years. And so I had a brother-in-law who was in the construction business, and he got us an apartment in Cambridge. Well, that didn't last too long because every time we got into it was a 2-room place in a little kitchen. Fine, we didn't care what we had, but we'd have to stamp our feet so all the little insects would run away. We had to stay in that horrible apartment for 4, 5, 6 months. And when David still had to go back to the
Army?
The Marines. He had to go until the 6 months were up. Mm-hmm. So I used to walk from there. It was not a bad walk to Fenway Park. And I used to go to the ball game all the time. I loved it. Because I didn't have a car in Cambridge. I didn't have a car. Mm-hmm. And my mother was wonderful. She would try to come and get me and shop with me or do something. And I'd say, no, I'm all right.
When did you move to Newton?
We made it in Newton just when the baby was about 2 months old.
Now, you did find, however, you had some difficulty with anti-Semitism.
Yeah. When we moved here, we had some wonderful neighbors. We loved the area. The school was down the street. And we were invited. The trouble wasn't really trouble, but we did confront some unhappy times because we were invited to a lovely Christmas party up the street, and as part of the party, a gentleman just happened to walk over and was chatting with me, and he said, "What do you think of the dark houses down the street?" Very angrily, and I said, "I don't know what you're talking about." And he said, well, the Jewish people that had moved in.
And that meant that the Jewish people were not putting out Christmas lights.
That's right.
And he was anti-Semitic
Yeah.
and did not care for the habits of Jewish people. And then you told me a story about the park, the tennis courts.
Yes. Well, we later on, now I'm jumping a couple of years, we found out that the beautiful tennis courts up the street were owned by a group. It was like a golf course where you belong, and Jews were not allowed to join. And I didn't know that, and a lot of my dear friends on the street didn't know it either, and I'm talking about people that weren't Jewish. And they were as horrified, I must say, as I was. But those people did not belong to the club. Anybody that belonged to the club, of course, knew. And we didn't know what to do about it. And I loved tennis. I played a lot of it. I wanted my girls to learn how to play. It was 5 houses away or 6 houses away. And it seemed terrible if we couldn't play tennis there. And eventually, one day, a friend of one of the girls' mother came to the house and asked if David and I would join the club. And we said, well, I said to this lovely lady, do you know what you're asking us to do? And she said, yes, yes. My husband and I talked about it, and we're horrified. And we've heard that your name came up and it was turned down. And I said, well, I don't want to put my girls or anybody else into trouble because of this, so we'll let you know. So at the time, we had a very dear friend who was a rabbi of Michigan Tefillah, wonderful, wonderful man. And we asked him what he thought we should do. And he just was very quick at the answer. Do you want this to go on? And we said, well, no. And then he said, do you want somebody else to be the first, or do you want yourselves to be the first? And we said, well, we know ourselves, so I guess we had to say yes, we wouldn't mind being the first. And he said, go for it. And don't tell your children. They don't have to know ahead. And if anything happens, they'll find out their own way. Don't you tell them anything about this. And we said, okay, and we didn't. And it was pretty good for a while, but Marion, my youngest, a year later, well, they were very little, but a year later, came back and said somebody told her to get off the court. And so then we went to another friend on the street who was a member of their board meeting, and he brought it up again and said, we've just got to stop this. Tennis court again when this kid yelled at her, what are you doing here? You're Jewish.
And you find Newton much more welcoming today.
That's what I'm saying. Yes, I do. That's what I meant by the change. They're much more welcoming. There are problems. There's problems in schools. We've had them. They've been in the paper. But I do think it's improved tremendously.
How did you get involved in Father Drynen's campaign?
Okay. I have a daughter by the name of Ranny. Her real name is Frances, named after my hubby's mother. And Ranny was here after college in the house and sort of not doing too many things. And I said to her, well, there is a priest that is running Congress, and his office is down in Watertown Square, and maybe you should go down there and see if they need any help. And the idea that she would go to work for a priest for Congress was the most wonderful thing that happened to her ever, because that started her life in politics. And the fact that he won, really, he took her to Washington with him and with her husband. And from there, her life became all Washington, Father Drynen, and then Kennedy, and she was Kennedy's chief of staff for 10 years. The proudest thing of my work in Newton was working for the Newton Senior Center. We worked very, very hard to get it. And we were very proud of what we created. It's been great for a lot of seniors, and we're very proud of it.
And you're still on the board of directors, are you not?
Oh yeah, I'm still on the board of directors, and it's really just great, and they're doing a wonderful job. And I've gotten involved in other things, of course.
And what did you have to do with the new library?
Well, the new library, I've had a lot to do with, and I've been involved since before it opened and to today. And we needed the new library desperately. And it's opened Newton to a lot of neighboring towns that thought that you couldn't even go to Newton. It was too elegant. And we have all nationalities, all kinds of people, wonderful people that come through those gates. And we're very proud of it. And I was on the board for 6 or 8 years and president of the board. And then on a group of us that meets once a month called SWAT Team, and we do anything that the library wants us to do that day to help them. And that keeps us attached to the library. And that's been part of my life as getting older.
Oh, can you tell us a few of the things you do on SWAT Team?
What this last time we were taking a book of music, and the coding on the outside of it was wrong. We were putting new coding on the outside. Well, when you have 400 books, that takes a lot of people. So we sit there doing that kind of thing. It's the kind of thing that you can have wonderful conversation with the person next to you and keep getting your job done. And we've been doing it from the day it opened. Sandy Butzel and I were speaking to the past president or chairman of the library, and she said, I'll never get all the books out of where the library was in Newton onto this building. We'll never get it done in time. And Sandy and I looked at each other. We were talking to her, and we said, we'll get it done. And that's what started the SWAT Team. And by golly, Sandy and I have worked all these years, and we did get it done.